Okay, good evening, everybody. I hope everybody is well. Emily, are you on? Can you just tell me if you could hear me? Emily, yes, we're good?
Excellent. I can hear you. You're good.
Okay. Shavua Tov. Hope everybody had a nice Shabbat and hope everybody is doing well. First of all, I want to remind everybody that the SCA's fundraiser has officially begun. Of course, programs like this and classes like this are what make the SCA run and continue to inspire people and motivate. So if you can send a donation in, text SCA to 44321 or go to donate.scaupdates.org. And I want to thank Emily and Tobias for helping us put this together tonight. Emily, Chazak Baruch on all the efforts. And I also hope that everybody is staying safe. The pandemic is not over. And there's been an uptick in what's been going on, and it is threatening our schools and our shuls. So I hope everybody is playing it safe and doing the right thing in terms of continuing to social distance and wear masks and do everything that is important to make sure that everybody stays healthy and safe. We stand 1 week from Rosh HaShana. In 1 week from yesterday, actually, we will stand Yom Hadin in front of Borei Olam. Hold on, I just want to share my screen. Great. Oops. Sorry about that. Nope. Okay, I apologize. It's been a long time since I've been on Zoom. I got used to being in person for the last couple of months. Okay. So in 1 week, we will stand before Borei Olam and Yom Hadin, and there are a lot of emotions that people are feeling. I would say probably most appropriately is apprehension. The general apprehension that people feel with Yom Hadin and start of the new year, coupled with the apprehension of the uncertainty of the last 6 months and the uncertainty of what lies ahead. And with that, we walk into a day that is really highlighted by this concept of uncertainty as we pray to Borei Olam for what will be in the next year. With that, I want to begin our conversation tonight with a Mishna, a very interesting Mishna in Rosh HaShana. The Mishna reads as follows: Mi shehaya over achorei bet haKnesset, o shehaya beto samuch lebet haKnesset, v'shama kol shofar, o kol megillah, Im kiven libo yatsa, v'im lo kiven lo yatsa. Af al pi shezeh shama v'zeh shama, zeh kiven libo v'zeh lo kiven libo. The Mishnah brings two interesting cases. Case number one, a person is walking by a shul on Rosh HaShana and he hears the shofar. And as he's walking by, he hears the shofar and he has in mind that in hearing the shofar that's coming out of the shul window, he wants to fulfill his obligation for the blowing of the shofar. He fulfills his obligation. If he doesn't have the intention to fulfill his obligation, it doesn't work. The second case that the Mishnah brings is, person lives adjacent to the shul. In Brooklyn, very practical. Person's backyard butts up against the back of the shul. He's sitting on his back porch, and he hears the blowing of the shofar from the shul as he's sitting at home. Once again, if he has in mind to fulfill his obligation with the blowing of the shofar, he fulfills his obligation. If he does not have it in mind, even though he heard it, he does not fulfill his obligation. Those are the two cases that the Mishnah in Rosh HaShana brings. The Gemara on that Mishnah wants to use that discussion as a point of proof for a much larger debate in Shas, in Gemara. And that debate is, do mitzvot need your intention in order for you to be able to fulfill your obligation? That means as follows. If I hold that mitzvot sirichot kavana, that mitzvot need my intention in order to fulfill the obligation, it means if I just go through the robotic action of doing what I do, but I'm not thinking about it. I'm not thinking about the fact that I'm doing a mitzvah. I'm not thinking about what this mitzvah is all about. I did not fulfill my obligation, in which case we're all in a lot of trouble. The other half of the argument says, you don't necessarily need to have intention. You did the action, you did the action. It would be better if you had the right intentions, but as long as you did it, you fulfilled your obligation. Again, the Gemara wants to use the Mishnah that we just read as a proof in this argument in the following fashion. Tashema, says the Gemara, I want to bring a proof for my larger contextual argument about whether or not mitzvot need kavana. And I'm going to bring this Mishnah. Haya over ahore bet haKnesset, if somebody's walking behind the shul, or shaya beto samuch lebet haKnesset, or his house is adjacent to the shul, v'shama kol shofar al kol megillah, and he hears the sound of the shofar or the blowing of the megillah, im kiven libo yatza v'im lav lo yatza. If he had intention, he fulfills his obligation. If not, he doesn't. My lav im kiven libo latzet. Doesn't this help to prove that, in fact, mitzvot do need your proper intention in order for you to fulfill the obligation? Perfect proof. We're not going to get into the larger conversation. We're going to stay honed in just on this point. Again, right now, the Gemara is bringing the Mishnah as a proof that you need intention in order to fulfill the obligation for the mitzvah. The Mishnah now responds with a very strange response, and this is where our conversation has its jumping point. Says the Mishnah, lo, this is not a proof. Lishmoa, he has to have in mind to hear it. The Gemara says, Lishmoa v'hashama. What do you mean he has to have in mind to hear it? He heard it already. It's not like, oh, I meant to go to shul, I meant to hear it, and I got caught up with my kids, so I didn't go. How could you tell me he means to hear? He heard it. The guy was sitting on his back porch. He heard the blowing of the shofar. What is this? There's no question of intention. He heard the sound of the shofar. So Gemara says, you're right. He did, but sabur hamor be'almahu. The guy heard it, but when he heard it, he thought that the sound of the shofar was a donkey making noise. Okay, we've had the Gemara give some very silly and interesting responses, but this one seems to be way out of the box. Now, we have two problems with this flow of information. Number one, why does the Mishnah have to give me two cases that seemingly prove the same point? He was walking behind the shul, or he was sitting in his backyard adjacent to the shul. It's the same thing. Either way, the guy was not in the building. He heard the sound of the shofar. I don't care whether or not he was walking or sitting in his back porch. He heard it by way of. Why do I need two cases to prove the same point? Number one. Number two, you have to be kidding. Who's sitting in their house on Rosh HaShana, hears the sound of the shofar and thinks, oh, it's probably a donkey braying. It's just not a plausible case. What were the rabbis thinking when they created a situation where a guy thinks that the sound of the shofar that he hears on Rosh Hashanah morning from his back porch is a donkey making noise? I put the questions on hold for a moment, and I moved to a Gemara earlier in Masechet Rosh Hashanah on Daf Yud Aleph, and that will begin to help us answer the question. And the Mishnah and the Gemara reads, Berosh Hashanah yatsa Yosef mibet ha'asurin. On Rosh Hashanah, Yosef Hasadik came out of prison. Minalan, how do we know that was the day? Dichtiv, because it says in the Pasuk of Tehillim, famous Pasuk that is associated with Rosh Hashanah, Tik'u b'chodesh shofar b'keseh liyom hagenu. Kichok l'Yisraelu v'gomer edut b'Yosef samo b'tzeto v'gomer. Pasuk says, you should blow the shofar, bakese liyom hagenu. This word bakese, which is not spelled with an aleph, this is a derivation, is going to be derived out by the rabbis in two ways. Number one, the word is spelled with a he, bakese, which can mean covered. To teach me the following. In what month, for what holiday do I blow the shofar? The holiday during which the moon is covered. On what holiday is the moon covered? Rosh Hashanah, because it's the first day of the month. And on the first day of the month, the moon at best is a crescent. I can barely see it. All the other holidays are in the middle of the month. Yom Kippur is on the 10th. Sukkot is on the 15th. Pesach is on the 15th. Shavuot is on the 6th, which is deep enough into the month that I can see the moon. The only holiday that falls out when the moon is a crescent, barely visible, is Rosh Hashanah. Proof from this pasuk, or this pasuk is a hint, that I blow the shofar in the month of Tishri on the first of the month, and that is Rosh HaShana. The derivation that the rabbis want to do now is, I want to change the letter. I want to make the he into an aleph and say, Bekiseh, tiku b'chodesh shofar, bekiseh liyom hagenu. That the Yosef ascended to the throne, kiseh, his chair, the throne, ascended to the throne on the holiday that you blow the shofar, which is Rosh HaShana, and approving from that pasuk that is when Yosef Hasadik became the second in command. Again, seemingly a stretch by the rabbis and a derivation to teach me that Yosef left prison on Rosh Hashanah. We need to explain first this last Mishnah that we read, and then we need to move back. First, we need to understand that Yosef HaSadik, at that point in his life when he was in prison, was at rock bottom. He's thrown in a pit with the worst people in society for a sin he didn't even commit. He's left for naught. For all anybody knows, he's never coming out. His life, as we know it, is over. Again, he's hit rock bottom. At the drop of a hat, Paro calls him out of prison. He's cleaned up, he's shaven, he puts on nice clothing, he comes before the king who asks him a question, he interprets a dream, and at the drop of a hat, he goes from being underground with the worst people in society for a sin he didn't commit to being the second in command of the most powerful country in the world, to the most powerful man in the world. And in that regard, he came out of prison on Rosh HaShana. That was the message of the rabbis. Yes, they're playing with the words. We don't know when Yosef came out of prison. It was 3,500 years ago. We don't know what the date was. But philosophically, Yosef came out of prison on Rosh HaShana because Rosh HaShana is an opportunity to start fresh. Things can change on a dime. We just learned that. Not 6 months ago, people were at the top of the economic chain. They had flourishing businesses. They were healthy. They were powerful. 24 hours later, they lost their business. They lost their health, and there was no more stability. Things can happen at the drop of a hat. We say it as a punchline, but now we've seen it happen. Rosh HaShana can change things just as quickly as they did 6 months ago in the converse. And that's what happened to Yosef. He was imprisoned, but he was set free from his prison, from being rock bottom on that, whatever that day was, but that was Rosh HaShana. It was a new beginning. It was a fresh start. It was an opportunity to move forward. As the pasuk in Kohelet says, Ki mibet hasurim yatsa limloch. From prison, he rose to be the king. Ki gam b'machluto nolad rash. Yosef HaSadik was transformed on whatever day that was, and it may as well have been Rosh HaShana, because that is a transformative day. And that's what the rabbis were trying to tell us with this dirasha that he came out on Rosh HaShana. But the only way that Rosh HaShana can become a transformative day is if I understand what the rabbis were trying to tell me above in this very strange Mishnah. And that is the following. There are two cases in the Mishnah. They are not identical. The first case is a regular case. A guy was walking by a shul and he heard the shofar blowing. He had in mind to fulfill his obligation. He fulfills his obligation. It's a very practical case. Person is walking on Ocean Parkway. The window of the shul is open. He's running a little bit late. He hears the shofar. He says, oh, I caught it just in time. He has in mind, I want to fulfill my obligation. He fulfills his obligation. It's a halachic point and it's a practical one. The second case, the guy's at home and he hears the shofar and he thinks it's the braying of a donkey. That's the problem. Why is he home? It's Rosh HaShana. If there's 3 days a year you're going to shul, it's Rosh HaShana and Yom Kippur. Why is he home? He's home because he's disengaged. He's disenchanted. He's lost touch with his spiritual self, so much so that when he hears the shofar, he thinks it's the braying of a donkey. Not really thinks it's the braying of a donkey, but his mind is in a completely different place. He's not in touch. Doesn't really mean that the braying of a donkey. He's hearing the shofar, and his mind is in a completely different olam, in a different world. He's not even registering that the shofar is blowing and it's Rosh HaShana and he's supposed to be in shul. He is spiritually empty. He is running on spiritual emptiness. Again, he's disengaged, he's disenchanted, he's disenfranchised. He has nothing to do with what's going on. He is bereft of spirituality in his life. Having the intention to hear the shofar at that moment may be what brings him back and is the new beginning for him. But the only way Rosh HaShana can be transformative is if I am spiritually plugged in, mentally, spiritually, emotionally plugged in. And I fear, and having spent the last few weeks doing a lot of different things, that many of us, not to this degree, but many of us are spiritually empty. And to no fault of your own. Shuls were closed, schools were closed, things are starting to open back up. People don't know, should they go, shouldn't they go, should I engage, shouldn't I engage? Rosh HaShana, high holidays, I want to go to shul, I don't know if I should go to shul, they can have a separate minyan, maybe I'm a little bit older, maybe I'm compromised, and our minds are in a completely different place. I'll tell you for myself, I stood in shul yesterday, I was giving a class, and my mind, it just wasn't there. I got a mask on, and there's 25 people where there's usually 200 people, and they have masks on, and I'm in a different room, and it's just, the spiritual essence of my mind has just been confused. And I think a lot of us are in that place. And if we want Rosh HaShana to be transformative, and it can be, and it should be, and it will be, we need to find a way to re-engage. And that really is what the shofar is all about. Look at the way the Torah describes the mitzvah to blow the shofar on the holiday. It's a conflict. In Sefer Vayikra, in Parashat Emor, the Torah says, Daber el bnei Yisrael emor. Tell the Jewish people, B'chodesh HaShavi'i b'echad HaChodesh yeh lachem Shabbaton. On the first day of the 7th month, Aleph Tishri, holiday. Zichron Tiru'ah Mikra Kodesh. It's a commemoration, a remembrance of blowing the shofar on your holiday. Yani, we're not blowing, we're talking about it. We have a ceremony that celebrates the shofar. Maybe we'll recap the Akedah, we'll sing Et Sharei Ratzon, but we're not blowing. It's a zichron teruah. It's a remembrance of the shofar blowing. But in Parashat Pinehas, in source number 6, Torah says, on the 7th month, on the first day, Mikra Kodesh, Yeh Lachem, it's holiday, Kol Melechet Avodah Lo Ta'asu, don't do any work, Yom Teruah Yeh Lachem, blow the shofar. So, am I blowing or am I not blowing? Torah is contradicting itself. One pasuk tells me blow, one pasuk tells me just think about it. The rabbis use this as a dirasha as well to tell me that there's a dichotomy. When Rosh HaShana falls out on Shabbat, as it does this year, don't blow. That day is Zichron Teruah. Talk about it. You'll read the ceremony, you'll sing the song, you'll talk about it, but you can't blow because it's Shabbat. When it doesn't fall out on Shabbat, then you blow. And it's very nice, and it works beautifully, but it can't be that that's what the Torah meant. Because according to the Torah, black on white, you're allowed to blow the shofar on Shabbat. The rabbis made a decree, don't blow the shofar on Shabbat. So it can't be that the intention of the Torah was to say that this is when it falls out on Shabbat and this is when it's not, because according to the Torah, again, you're allowed to. Again, it's a nice dirasha that the rabbis made as a mnemonic device to remember their law, but that's not black on white what it means. So how could the Torah contradict itself? Rav Soloveitchik answers and says that the Torah is defining for us two aspects of the shofar. One is the ma'aseh. You have to go through the physical mechanics of blowing the shofar. It's got to be heard. The only way for it to be heard is for somebody to blow it. The sound has to be there. You got to blow the shofar. That's Yom Teruah. Somebody blows it, everybody hears it, and that is the physical fulfillment of the mitzvah. Zichron Teruah is that you have to be mentally engaged. Zichron, the memory, the mind, the intellect, the emotion, the spirituality has to also be there. If the action of the shofar, the blowing happens, but you're not mentally engaged, then you missed it. Yes, okay, you fulfilled the obligation because you heard it. But you fulfilled the obligation only 50% of the way, because it's calling upon your mind, your spiritual investment, to be spiritually engaged with what's happening, to hear it, to reflect on it, to internalize it, to think about how this is a new moment in time. This is your opportunity to be free from prison, whatever that imprisonment might be in your own life, and to start fresh. But the only way it's going to work is with zichron teruah, is if you're spiritually and mentally engaged. But if our minds are somewhere else, and again, for many of us, that's the case to no fault of our own. It's been an impossible 6 months, and things are starting to go up and then back down again, and back up and back down again. We need to reconnect, however that might be. And we need to reflect on the last 6 months, think about where we were, think about how far we've come and where we want to move going forward. And the sound of the shofar should be that wake-up call. It's time to wake up. Ben Adam alachani redam kum kira b'tach hanunim. Wake up. Time has come to wake up. And it doesn't mean throw caution to the wind, not at all. I started by saying everybody has to be careful with things going up. But spiritually, we need to be re-engaged. Because our minds is where everything is going to sit if things are going to change. And to that end, we read not too long ago in Parashat Shofetim about going out to war. And there are those who are exempt from going out to war. Pesukim say, "V'dibru hashotrim el ha'am lemor mi ha'isha shed bana bayit hadash v'lo chanacho." Anybody who built a house but has not yet had the opportunity to live in it, yelech v'yashov lebeto, go home, don't come to war. Pen namut b'milchama, you might be killed in war. V'isha acher yichanechenu, and somebody else will live in your house. Anybody who planted a vineyard and didn't yet enjoy the fruit, should go home. Don't go to war. You might be killed. Somebody else is going to reap the fruits of your labor, literally. Anybody who got engaged to a woman but didn't marry her yet, go home. You might get killed in war. Somebody else is going to marry the woman you fell in love with. And as they concluded speaking to the people, they said, anybody that's afraid, go home. And don't have your fear be contagious to everybody else, and then the whole camp is overrun with fear and we lose. So I can interpret this in two ways. The first three are very telling, and I mentioned it in a class I gave a few weeks ago. Number one here is new beginnings. Anybody that started something and didn't finish it, you have to go home. You have to finish. You started something, you have to finish. And it's a perfect message for Rosh HaShana. We're starting now. Whatever you commit to start at this point of the year, you're committing to finish. Don't make half-baked resolutions. Think about what's real, start them, and finish them. Problem is the last category. Anybody who's afraid, go home. Has nothing to do with beginnings. But if it's in the category, it must be telling me something about the category of all four. And what I think the message of the Torah is, each one of these people, their mind is in a different place. You just built a house. You just made millions of dollars of investment. You didn't even sleep in it yet. Now you're going to go home to war. Where's your head? Your head is back home, where you want it to be, because you want to live in the house. You just invested in a field. You blood, sweat, and tears. Finally, it's the harvest season. You want to go out to war. His mind is not there. His mind is back in the vineyard. He just got engaged, fell in love. He wants to get married. He got engaged. He's worried he's going to get killed. The war's not going to be able to get him. His mind is not there. And lastly, of course, the guy who's afraid. He's afraid. His mind is not there. When your mind is not plugged in, you are not there. You might physically be standing there and you may be holding a gun, but you're useless to me. Your mind is not in it. You're not here. And that, again, is the message of Rav Soloveitchik. It's the message of Yosef HaSadik. It's the message of the Mishnah. If we are not going to be spiritually engaged, then we're not going to have a day that is transformative. If the day is going to be bereft of any kind of passion, it's just not going to work to help us change. We're all running on empty. It's true. Spiritual emptiness. And again, the schools have been closed and the shuls have been closed and classes are in Zoom and I'm zoomed out and I don't want to hear it anymore and I'm done. Rosh HaShana is the opportunity to recharge, to re-engage, to reinvest, and to become enchanted again. Borei Olam is waiting for us to come back and to start all over again. And perhaps, if we do so, perhaps if we become re-engaged, if we mend our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then as quickly as things changed at the drop of a hat 6 months ago when we went from the top to the bottom, the converse will happen, and we, like Yosef HaSadik, will be freed from this imprisonment, and things will change for the positive. We will begin Rosh HaShana with the song Ahot Ketana. The song ends, Tichle Shana v'kililoteha, Tahel Shana birchoteha. The year that's behind us with all of its curses should end, and the new year and all of its blessings should begin. Perhaps now more than ever, we can understand and appreciate that line. And as we say it, have in mind that whatever has happened should be a distant memory very quickly, and everything that is in front of us should be a beracha. But the only way to transform is to show up, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Tizkulu Shanim Rabot. I want to wish everybody a year filled with health, happiness, and success. May Borei Olam give us all of our heart's desires. Amen.